Hey guys, welcome to the 2 a.m. pipe on the patio. Today, smoking my LCS Briars number 335, which needs a good polish. It does that. And in it, I am smoking some Grassmere Flake. Oh, wonderful tobacco. Some Gawith and Hogarth Grassmere Flake. I just got a little bit of that left. Can barely see it in there. Got maybe a pipe or two of that left. And I need to order more of that, if I can find it. Man, that's good stuff. It's a beautiful day. It's about 88 degrees out. Gorgeous. I got the fan going here. I joined up on Instagram. Got an Instagram account. I had an Instagram account a long time ago and I never used it. I decided to do an Instagram account again, and I don't know if I'll keep it or not, but I found an old family friend, an old parish priest. It's Father John Barry. He's actually a Monsignor now, Monsignor John Barry. He was a family friend of ours, and when I was in first grade, we were at church one time, and Father Barry was giving a sermon. And during this sermon, he said something to the effect of, you know, everybody is welcome to partake now in the sacrament of the Eucharist and of the communion. And so I asked my dad, I said, you know, Father Barry said everybody's welcome to come take communion. How come I can't, you know? And so my dad said, ask him after church. How come you can't have communion? And I hadn't made my first communion yet, and that, you know, that's why I couldn't take it. So after church, I asked him, I said, you know, Father Barry, during your sermon you said, you know, everybody was welcome to come now and partake of communion. How come I can't partake of communion? And he looked at my dad and he said, if he's actually listening to my sermons, he was from Ireland. He had the Irish brogue. he said if with that Irish brogue, if he's listening to my sermons, he may actually be ready to partake of communion. And the next day he came into school. I was going to Catholic school. He came into my class, and he took me out of class, and we went for a walk, and he discussed the sacrament of communion with me and what it was and everything, and made sure I understood what it was. And he allowed me to take my communion a year early, my first communion. And so the next Sunday, I got to go make my first communion. And that was a big deal. First communion's a big deal. And but I found Monsignor Barry on Instagram when I hadn't talked to him since 1986, when my father passed away. He called the house, and I answered the phone, and he talked to me, about my dad, how good a man my dad was, and they were great friends. And we had been gone from San Pedro, which was where we had gone to church at that time, and we left San Pedro in 1969. So that was 17 years, I guess it was. And he called our house to give his condolences to the family. My mom was busy at the time that he called, talking to mortician or somebody. It was at the house that she couldn't take his call, so I took his call. And that was the last time I had talked to him, was 1986. And so anyway, I sent him an email through Instagram, and he emailed me back today, and told me some stories about my dad. And my dad worked on all the bridges in California, on the state bridges. He worked on the Oakland San Francisco Bay Bridge, the Vincent Thomas Bridge in San Pedro, and then the San Diego Coronado Bay Bridge in San Diego. And he told me a story about going across the bridge in San Pedro, and my dad playing a trick on him, and he said it almost gave him a heart attack, and he said my dad just laughed hysterically about that. And my dad was a practical joker, loved to laugh. And then he talked about a man named Tony Trainy. Tony Trainy and his brother John owned a shoe shop. They were shoe cobblers, and they owned Trainy's Shoes. And when I was a little kid, I left San Pedro when I was 9. So I was young, very young. My dad used to take me into their shoe shop, and they were in the repair side of the shoe shop. We didn't go into the sales side. We would go into the repair side where John and Tony were. And I just remember that place being so filled with laughter all the time when we go in there. It was just so fun. And they would, as soon as we walked in, John Trainy would dip into they have a big thing of rubber cement, and he would dip into that thing, and he would make me a big old ball of rubber cement. And he'd roll it up into a big old ball, and he'd hand it to me. He'd say, now just bounce that thing. Go ahead and bounce that thing. And he'd let me bounce it in their shop, and it would literally bounce like a super ball. It was like a super ball. If you guys remember super balls, those of you old enough to remember super balls. But that thing would bounce all over the shop, and they would just laugh and laugh and laugh and laugh. And it was so neat to remember these memories of my childhood with Monsignor Barry, and remember the memories of these men who were wonderful men and good, solid human beings. And I remember that day that I made my first communion, Tony and John Trainy gave me cards filled with actual silver dollars. That they had taped inside the card. They were actual silver dollars. I wish I still had those. They may have been half dollars. I don't know. I don't remember. You know, I was a kid. I just remember opening that card and seeing these silver coins taped to the card, you know, and that was big money for a kid, you know, and then we all went out to breakfast together. Father Barry, the Traineys, my mom and dad, my family. It was a big deal, and but it was neat to go and remember that with Monsignor Barry. And so if nothing else happens from this joining Instagram, that happened, and it was worth it for that, because I have so many good memories of Monsignor Barry when he was Father Barry. And he would always come into my class, my first grade class, and he would bring a big box. It was like a box that you would get 24 cans of Coke in or something. And he'd have a bunch of jelly beans in it. And he would hand me the box, and he'd say, hand out a jelly bean to everybody in the class. Let everybody in the class pick out a jelly bean. And then when it was all over, he'd tell me, since you handed them out, you get to pick 2. And but he would tell me, don't tell anybody else that you got 2, but since you helped me, you get 2. And I always liked, the black ones. Nobody else liked the black ones, so I always took the black ones. But it was just neat reminiscing, and talking about those things. And there was he came to San Diego one time to visit my mom and dad, and they took him to this steakhouse in San Diego called Pinnacle Peak. If you walked into Pinnacle Peak, there were ties that had been, the bottom half of ties cut off, and they were hanging all over this steakhouse, just everywhere. The steakhouse was just covered in ties, and they'd have like business cards or whatever on them. And if you wore a tie into the steakhouse, they'd ring bells, bells would ring, and as soon as you sat down at the table, bells would ring. Waitress would come over with this big thing of scissors. They'd grab your tie and they'd cut it off. You weren't allowed to wear ties in the steakhouse. So my dad would always tell anybody who came to town, my dad would take them there. Father Barry, he told them, now you got to wear a tie in the steakhouse. You got to wear a tie to this place. It's a fancy place. You got to wear a tie. So Father Barry had this really fancy silk tie on. So when they got in the door, my dad was wearing a tie, and he slipped his off as they walked in the door. They sat down at the table, and the lady came over and grabbed Father Barry's tie, and he reached up and grabbed that thing and ripped it off, and he said, "You're not cutting this tie. This is a silk tie. You're not cutting this tie." My dad was laughing so hard. He goes, "I've never seen anybody get a tie off so fast in my entire life." Father Barry goes, "That's an expensive silk tie. You're not cutting that one off." Father Barry had such a great sense of humor. He was just, he was such a funny guy. He was just had a great sense of humor. Has a great sense of humor still, and but it was just neat. It was neat to get to connect with him again, and he reminisced about my dad, and so it was neat. It was just neat. Anyway, so I'm just gonna sit back, finish this, and I just wanted to talk about that. How neat that was, and after almost 40 years to reconnect with Father Barry, Monsignor Barry, and just have all those old memories come back to us, talk about them. Anyway, I will catch you guys later. God bless. Have a good day, and I'll catch you later. Bye-bye.